The funeral reception had emptied an hour ago, but John Davis still sat in the corner of his father's study, holding a coffee cup that had gone cold. The house felt different now, sterile, like a museum where he was no longer welcome. Through the window, he watched his stepmother Victoria direct movers as they loaded antique furniture into a truck. She'd wasted no time. The mahogany desk where his father had taught him to read balance sheets was already wrapped in moving blankets. The leather chair, worn smooth by decades of use, sat tagged for auction. John remembered being 7 years old, spinning in that chair while his dad worked late into the night, the smell of coffee and old books filling the air. His father would pause occasionally to ruffle his hair, to ask about school, to remind him that family always came first. That man wouldn't have done this, wouldn't have left his only son with nothing. John. Her voice cut through his thoughts. Victoria stood in the doorway, perfectly composed in her black Chanel dress, not a hair out of place despite the chaos of moving day. She'd been crying at the funeral, theatrical, dabbing tears with monogrammed handkerchiefs, but her eyes were dry now, calculating. "We need to talk about your situation." He set down the cup carefully, buying himself a moment. Victoria had entered their lives like a summer storm. Sudden, overwhelming, impossible to ignore. His father had met her at a charity gala 18 months ago, and within 3 months they were married. John had tried to be happy for him. Richard Davis had been lonely since John's mother passed, and Victoria seemed to bring light back into his eyes. Now John wondered if that light had been desperation, not joy. "My situation," he repeated, his voice hollow. "Your father's will was very clear. The house, the business, the accounts, everything goes to me. You're 26 years old. He felt you needed to make your own way." She pulled an envelope from her Prada purse with manicured fingers. "He did leave you this." John took it with numb fingers. Inside was a plane ticket to Seattle and $200 in cash. Departure. Tomorrow morning, 6:47 a.m. "Seattle," he said flatly, staring at the ticket like it might transform into something else if he looked hard enough. "Your father mentioned you'd always talked about the West Coast. Fresh start." Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. It never did, John realized now. How had he missed that? "The locks are being changed tonight. I've arranged for a car service to take you to the airport at 6. Be ready." He looked up at her, really seeing her for the first time. The designer clothes, the jewelry that had appeared gradually over 18 months, the way she'd systematically replaced his mother's paintings with modern art, his father's friends with her own social circle. She'd been erasing Richard Davis's old life piece by piece, and they'd all been too blind to notice. "This isn't right," John said quietly, anger beginning to burn through the numbness. "Dad and I were partners. We were planning the Seattle expansion together. 5 years I worked alongside him learning the business. He promised me." "Promised?" Victoria's voice hardened, the sympathetic widow mask slipping. "Your father made many promises, John. He also made choices. Legal choices documented by lawyers. I'm sorry you're disappointed, but your father made his decision. You have until morning." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and John? Don't think about contesting the will. I have the best attorneys in the state, and your father was of sound mind when he signed. You'll only embarrass yourself and waste what little money you have." The smile returned, cold as winter. "Safe travels." She left him there, surrounded by boxes marked for storage or donation. John's childhood home, his father's legacy, being dismantled and redistributed like it had never mattered. Like 30 years of memories could be packed up and thrown away in an afternoon. John walked through the house one last time, touching walls that held invisible marks. The dent from when he'd learned to ride his bike indoors at age 5, the door frame with penciled height measurements, the window seat where his mother used to read to him before the cancer took her. His father had kept everything exactly as she'd left it, a shrine to their family. Now Victoria's workers were painting over it all in fashionable grays and whites. In his old bedroom, already emptied except for a bare mattress, John found a loose floorboard he'd forgotten about. Underneath was a small wooden box containing childhood treasures. Baseball cards, a Swiss Army knife his dad had given him, a photo of the three of them at Disney World. His mother's smile was radiant, his father's arm around both of them, protective and strong. John had been 8, gap-toothed and sunburned and happy. He pocketed the photo and left the rest. Some memories were too heavy to carry. That night, John checked into a budget in near the airport, the kind of place that rented rooms by the hour and had cigarette burns in the carpets. It was all he could afford with $200 that needed to last until he figured out what came next. He lay awake on scratchy sheets that smelled of industrial detergent, listening to highway traffic and the muffled sounds of strangers' lives through paper-thin walls. Sleep wouldn't come. His mind kept replaying the past 6 months like a movie he couldn't turn off. The diagnosis had come in April, just as the cherry blossoms bloomed outside his father's office. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. 6 months, maybe 8 with treatment. Richard Davis had taken the news with characteristic stoicism, immediately putting his affairs in order, having difficult conversations with clients and partners. But he'd also grown distant with John, canceling their weekly dinners, cutting meetings short, always with Victoria hovering nearby. John had attributed it to illness and grief, his father preparing to say goodbye. Now he wondered if there had been something else. Fear? Coercion? Victoria had controlled his father's medications, his visitors, his phone. She'd been the gatekeeper to a dying man. Had Richard Davis tried to warn him? Had there been messages John had been too devastated to hear? At 3 in the morning, John finally dozed off, dreaming of his father. In the dream, Richard stood in his office, young and healthy, holding blueprints. "Seattle's the key, son," he said, just as he had 100 times. "That's where the future is. That's where you build something real." Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. John woke with tears on his face and his father's voice still echoing in his ears. The airport terminal buzzed with early morning travelers. Business people in suits rushing to catch flights, families with crying babies and overstuffed luggage, college students with backpacks heading home or away. John checked his duffel bag at the counter. Everything he owned that Victoria hadn't claimed fit into one worn canvas bag, and joined the security line with his ticket clutched in one hand. The ticket to Seattle felt like an exile, not a gift. A one-way journey to a city where he knew no one, had no job, no prospects, no plan. His father had always said planning was everything in real estate. "Measure twice, cut once," he'd say. "Know your exit strategy before you make your entrance." What was the exit strategy here? What was the plan? "Excuse me, are you John Davis?" He turned to find an elegant woman in her 60s standing beside him. She wore a camel cashmere coat that whispered money, carried a leather briefcase that probably cost more than his entire wardrobe, and had the kind of presence that made people instinctively step aside. Her silver hair was styled in a sophisticated bob, and her eyes, sharp and intelligent behind designer frames, studied him with unexpected warmth. "Yes," John said cautiously, immediately suspicious. Was this someone Victoria had sent? A lawyer with more bad news? "Thank God I caught you. I'm Margaret Chen." She extended her hand with firm confidence. "I was a close friend of your father's. We went to college together, long before you were born. Richard and I stayed in touch over the years. I only just heard about his passing. I'm so terribly sorry." John shook her hand, noting the strength in her grip, the calluses that suggested she worked with her hands despite the expensive clothes. "Thank you. I'm sorry, but I don't remember Dad mentioning." He wouldn't have. "We kept our friendship quiet. Professional reasons." Margaret glanced around the crowded terminal, then at the security line moving slowly forward. "Is there somewhere we can talk? It's important. It's about your father." John hesitated. His flight boarded in 40 minutes, and he'd learned recently to be wary of strangers bearing convenient stories. But something in Margaret's expression, a genuine concern that reminded him painfully of his father, a urgency that felt real, made him nod. They found a quiet corner near an empty gate, away from the morning rush. Margaret set down her briefcase and faced him directly, no preamble. "Your father contacted me 3 months before he died. she said. July 15th. He called me at 2 in the morning, which was unusual because Richard always respected boundaries. But he was frightened, John. Truly frightened. He'd discovered some concerning financial activities. Large transfers to offshore accounts, forged signatures on corporate documents, changes to his will that he didn't remember authorizing. He suspected Victoria had married him for his money and was systematically planning to cut you out entirely. John felt the ground shift beneath him. Then why didn't he change his will? Why didn't he stop her? He tried. Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. But by then, he was too weak to fight her legally. Victoria had isolated him from his longtime attorneys, convinced him to switch to her own lawyers. She controlled his medications. God knows what she was giving him. Some days he was lucid, other days confused. She'd arranged for a psychiatric evaluation that suggested early dementia, which would have made any new will contestable. Your father was trapped, John. And he was a proud man. It killed him to know what was happening and feel powerless to stop it. John's hands clenched into fists. I should have seen it. I should have protected him. Victoria is a professional. This wasn't her first time. Margaret opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder, thick with documents. After your father called me, I did some investigating. Her real name is Victoria Strand. She's been married 4 times before, always to wealthy older men, always widowed within 2 years, always walking away with everything. The other families tried to fight her legally, but she's careful. Everything's documented, everything's legal. She's a predator, but a smart one. The words hit John like physical blows. His father, brilliant and strong, reduced to prey. Hunted and consumed by someone who'd smiled at the funeral, who'd held John's hand and called him son. So I've lost everything, John said numbly. And there's nothing I can do about it. I didn't say that. Margaret pulled out more papers, spreading them across the empty seats beside them. Your father wasn't a fool, John. Sick, yes. Trapped, yes. But not foolish. He created a backup plan, and he asked me to execute it. She handed him documents, corporate papers, account statements, property deeds. John's hands shook as he read, not quite believing what he was seeing. 6 years ago, long before he met Victoria, your father created a separate trust, Margaret explained, pointing to specific passages. He placed several properties into it, including the Morrison Building downtown, the commercial property he always said would be yours. Do you remember it? John nodded wordlessly. The Morrison Building. 12 stories of prime downtown real estate, fully leased, generating steady income. His father had bought it at auction 15 years ago for a fraction of its value, and they'd renovated it together, John learning every aspect of property management. This will be yours someday, his father had promised. Your foundation. Victoria doesn't know it exists, Margaret continued. The will she inherited from covers your father's personal estate, the house, his primary business accounts, his personal investments. But this trust operates independently with me as trustee. Your father updated it 6 months before his diagnosis, placing additional properties and accounts into it. And as of your 26th birthday, which was 2 weeks ago, correct? Everything in this trust transfers directly to you. John stared at the papers, his mind struggling to process. The Morrison Building alone was worth millions. But there were other properties listed, a small apartment complex, 3 retail spaces, a parking garage, investment accounts, business plans, letters of introduction to partners in Seattle. He really was planning for me to go to Seattle, John whispered, his voice breaking. Not as a castaway, Margaret said firmly. As an entrepreneur. Your father wanted you to build something of your own, away from Victoria's reach and shadow. He knew she'd get the house and the primary business. He was too sick to prevent that without exposing the trust. But this, she tapped the folder with one elegant finger. This is your inheritance. Your real inheritance. Everything he wanted you to have protected. The PA system announced pre-boarding for his Seattle flight. John looked from the documents to his ticket, pieces finally clicking into place like a puzzle he'd been trying to solve for months. The ticket, the money, the timing. He sent me away to protect this. He sent you away to give you a future. Margaret's eyes softened behind her glasses, revealing grief she'd held back. Richard talked about you constantly when we met. How proud he was of the man you'd become. Your work ethic, your integrity, your vision. He hated that he couldn't tell you the truth before he died. But Victoria monitored everything. His phone, his visitors, his mail. This was the only way to keep the trust hidden until you were legally entitled to it. John felt tears burn behind his eyes, the first he'd allowed since the funeral. His father hadn't abandoned him, hadn't chosen a new wife over his own son. Every confusing decision, every painful moment of distance, every unanswered question had been Richard Davis playing a long game, protecting his son the only way he could. "What do I do now?" John asked, his voice rough with emotion. Margaret smiled, transforming her formal elegance into something warm. "You get on that plane. You go to Seattle and you build the empire your father envisioned. There's enough capital in the trust to start immediately. Look here." She pulled out a leather-bound journal, his father's familiar handwriting filling the pages. He left detailed plans for everything: property acquisitions, partnership strategies, sustainable development models. He spent his final months not just protecting your inheritance, but designing your future. John took the journal with trembling hands, opened it to a random page. His father's voice leaped off the paper. "John will understand sustainable urban development better than anyone. He has vision without greed, ambition without ruthlessness. Seattle is ready for what he can build. I'll handle all the legal details and forward everything you need to your new address," Margaret continued, pulling out a business card and a key. "This is the key to a furnished apartment in Capitol Hill. I leased it last week when I knew you'd be coming. 6 months paid, plenty of time to get established. My number is on the card. Call me anytime, day or night. Your father trusted me with this because I owed him my life once. He backed my first development when no one else would, believed in me when I was a young architect with more dreams than sense. Now I owe it to both of you to see this through." John stood, clutching the folder and journal like lifelines. "Thank you. I don't know how to ever repay. Live well. Build something meaningful. Make your father proud." Margaret stood as well, extending her hand again. "That's repayment enough. Your father believed in you completely, John. He told me once that you had twice his talent and 3 times his heart. Now you need to believe in yourself." The final boarding call echoed through the terminal. John shook Margaret's hand, then surprised both of them by pulling her into a brief hug. She patted his back, maternal and kind. "Go build your future," she whispered. "He's watching, you know, and he's already proud." John grabbed his duffel bag, the folder of documents, and his father's journal, clutching them against his chest like armor against the world. As he walked toward the gate, he felt the weight of grief and anger lift, replaced by something he hadn't expected to feel again: purpose. The plane took off into a crystalline October morning, banking over the city that had been his whole world. From the window, John could see his father's office building downtown, Victoria's new mansion in the historic district, the highways and neighborhoods that made up his past. Then the plane climbed higher and it all fell away into abstraction, just another city growing smaller by the second. He opened his father's journal, reading page after page of careful planning. Richard Davis had outlined everything: which properties to target in Seattle's growing neighborhoods, which architects and contractors to approach, how to build relationships with community leaders, strategies for sustainable development that benefited both investors and residents. There were personal notes, too, scattered throughout. "Remember that real estate is about people, not just properties. Your mother taught me that. Buildings are just wood and stone until they become homes, businesses, communities. Build for people and profit will follow. Victoria thinks she's won. Let her think that. The best victories are the ones your opponent never sees coming. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you in person, son. I'm sorry for the pain these last months have caused. But I needed Victoria to believe she'd succeeded completely. Otherwise, she'd have found a way to take this too. Trust Margaret. Trust yourself. And trust that everything I've done was to protect you and give you the future you deserve." John wiped his eyes, not caring that the businesswoman across the aisle was watching. His father had loved him, had protected him, had built him a foundation even while dying. The plane ticket that had seemed like rejection was actually a map, a mission, a vote of confidence. 3 months later, John stood in the lobby of the Morrison Building. His building now, watching contractors install new lighting. The Seattle office was smaller than his father's empire back east, but it was his, built on his own vision. Margaret had helped him navigate the legal transfer, and now he held clear title to properties worth over $8 million. His phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Second property closing confirmed for next week. The retail space on Pike Street. Your father would be beaming. John smiled, looking around the renovated lobby. Exposed brick and modern fixtures, sustainable materials, designed to last generations. He'd already signed leases with 3 tech startups and a nonprofit that provided job training for homeless youth. His father's philosophy, build for people, profit will follow, was working. His new assistant, Margaret Chen, Margaret's daughter, who'd relocated from San Francisco to help him, appeared with coffee and a tablet. The architects are here for the Pioneer Square meeting. And you got another call from that lawyer back east. Victoria's lawyer? Same one. 4th time this week. John had been expecting this. Margaret had warned him that eventually Victoria would discover the trust. Probably when she tried to sell the Morrison Building and found she didn't actually own it. The calls had started 2 weeks ago. First polite inquiries, then thinly veiled threats. Let them call, John said. Everything's legal. Everything's documented. There's nothing she can do. She's threatening to sue for fraud. Let her. She'll lose, and it'll cost her a fortune in legal fees. John took the coffee gratefully. My father planned for this. Margaret's been through 4 similar cases with Victoria's previous victims. She knows every move Victoria will make before she makes it. Sarah grinned. I like you, boss. You've got steel under that nice guy exterior. My father's gift, John said softly. That and everything else. That evening, John sat in his new apartment. Much nicer than the one Margaret had initially leased, with a view of Elliott Bay, and video called Margaret. She appeared on screen, sitting in her own office across town. Papers spread around her. Victoria filed the lawsuit today, Margaret said without preamble. Claiming undue influence, questioning your father's mental competency when he created the trust, alleging fraud. It's all nonsense, but it'll take 6 months to resolve. I'm ready, John said. What do I need to do? Nothing. I'll handle it. That's why your father appointed me trustee. She can't touch you directly. Margaret's expression softened. How are you doing, John? Really? He considered the question, looking around his new home, thinking about the business he was building, the relationships he was forming. I miss him, every day. But I think I'm becoming the man he wanted me to be. I'm building something that matters. He knew you would. That's why he fought so hard to protect your future. After they hung up, John opened his father's journal again, reading the final entry. It was dated 3 days before Richard Davis died. The handwriting shaky but clear. John, if you're reading this, Margaret found you. Thank God. I'm sorry for everything you've gone through. Sorry I couldn't be honest at the end. But I need you to understand. Victoria took my possessions, but she couldn't touch what matters. You are my legacy. Not buildings or bank accounts, but you, your character, your vision, your heart. Build something beautiful, son. Build something that helps people. And know that I loved you more than anything in this world. You were my greatest achievement, and whatever you create in Seattle will be mine too, because it will be built on the foundation of everything I taught you. I'm proud of you. I've always been proud of you. Build well, live well, and remember that real wealth isn't what you own. It's what you give. Love, Dad. John closed the journal, pressing it to his chest. Outside his window, the city lights of Seattle sparkled like stars, each one representing a life, a story, a possibility. His father had given him more than money or property. He'd given him a philosophy, a purpose, and proof that love could survive even death. 6 months later, Victoria's lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice, and she was ordered to pay legal fees. Margaret called with the news while John was on site at his newest project, a mixed-use development in the International District that would provide affordable housing, retail space for immigrant-owned businesses, and a community center. "It's over," Margaret said. "She can't appeal. She can't touch you." "Good," John said, watching construction workers frame up the building. "Not that I was worried. Your father would be so proud of what you've built. Not just the properties, the philosophy. You're changing how development works in this city." John thought about his father, about the lessons learned in that mahogany-paneled office, about the journal he still read every night. "He's here," John said simply. "In every decision I make, every building I design, every community I try to help. Victoria got his money, but I got his wisdom. And I know which inheritance I'd rather have." A year after that, John stood at the grand opening of the Richard Davis Community Center, funded by profits from his developments and bearing his father's name. Hundreds of people filled the space, families, business owners, city officials. Margaret stood beside him, elegant and proud, as they cut the ribbon together. "Your father," she said quietly, "told me once that the measure of a man isn't what he accumulates, but what he leaves behind. You've honored that, John. You've honored him." John looked around the center, the computer lab where kids would learn skills, the job training facility, the childcare center for working parents, the meeting rooms for community organizing. His father had built an empire of stone and steel. John was building something more lasting. Opportunity, hope, community. That night, back in his apartment, John pulled out the old photograph from Disney World. His mother's radiant smile, his father's protective arm, his own gap-toothed grin. He placed it in a new frame beside a recent photo. John standing in front of the Morrison Building, Margaret beside him, both smiling. Two inheritances, two families, one legacy. Victoria had won the battle for possessions. But John had won something far more valuable. He'd inherited his father's vision, his values, and his unshakable belief that real wealth meant building something that mattered. The plane ticket that had looked like exile had been the greatest gift his father could give. Not escape, but opportunity. Not an ending, but a beginning. And every building John developed, every community he strengthened, every life he touched would be a testament to Richard Davis, the man who'd loved his son enough to let him go, so he could truly fly. Hey everyone, if you enjoyed this content and want to see more, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means the world to me and helps this channel grow. I'm constantly working on bringing you exciting new videos, tutorials, and entertainment. Subscribing is completely free and takes just 1 second, but it makes a huge difference. Join our amazing community today and let's continue this journey together. Thanks for watching.